Alright, and welcome to the Swapping Faces tutorial. And this is really a fun tutorial that you can do. You can take your own photos at home if you have your family and friends, or if you have something you would just like to swap the face, replace one face with a totally different face, then that's what this tutorial is all about. I'll show you how to do that. Let's quickly go into the file browser and I'll show you the images that we will be using for this tutorial. Here's our original image that we have right here, and what I wanted to do is replace the face of this girl on the right with this gentleman's face right here, and you can see this is the final image right here. And now I'm going to show you a lot of techniques here on how to match the skin tones. So the skin tone will match the rest of the body of the person that you're replacing the face on. In other words, this woman here has different skin tones than this gentleman right here, and I'll show you how to match that so it blends in really nicely. So what I'll do is just go ahead and minimize this, and let's go ahead and get started here. I'll move this one out of the way here, and I'll go into the file browser, and let's just start off with the two girls here. I'll double click on that to load that up into Photoshop. Alright, and here's the image that we will be working on for this tutorial, and always keep in mind when you're starting a swapping faces project or whatever you're doing, you have to really look out for the angles of the faces. When you're taking one image and you're going to place it over another, well, you have to really look at the angles of the two faces. You can see, let me go ahead and open up this image into Photoshop of this gentleman here, and you can see the angle and the position and the direction of his face here, how he's turned his head a little bit. Well, it's almost very similar to the girl over here on the right, except for the rotation of that is a little bit different. Well, that's no big deal because we can just rotate that into Photoshop and fix that. But this is going to make it a lot easier for us to replace this face here of this gentleman over this girl's face right here. Now, if you're dealing with a photograph where you have somebody looking straight on at the camera, and then you have another photo, you want to replace that person that's looking straight at the camera, you want to replace that over another person where they're looking off to the left or something like that. Well, that's going to be a lot more difficult to do. If you do have a person that you would like to change the face out with, just make sure, if it's possible, look for a photo where the face is going in the same direction, or the head is going in the same direction, just to make it as easy as possible. And that way, when you get it all finished, it'll look somewhat realistic. So let's go ahead and get started here. This is fairly easy to do. This is not anything extremely complicated or anything like that. We don't have to do any big cropping or masking or anything. But what I'm going to do is just zoom into this gentleman here, and you can follow along with this tutorial. You can use this stock image here that I have. And what I'm going to do first is basically just cut his face or his head out of this image and then paste it over in this image here. And then after that, we will start to rotate and size the image to fit perfectly over her face here. Let's go back over here, and what I'm going to do is just select the lasso tool on the toolbar. I'll zoom out here a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is, I don't have to be really that neat. We don't have to crop this image right on the edge of his face here. Okay, we really don't have to do that because we're going to be doing some masking techniques later on that will make it much easier to match this face up with the other. So let's just go ahead and draw a selection around his head here, but also including some of the neck as well, because that will help us and allow us to blend more areas of his skin, and that will make things look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I select his entire forehead there at the top, and we can use some of his forehead on the other image as well. Let's come up here to Edit and Copy, and then let's switch back over to this image, and actually we can probably just go ahead and close this out because we don't need that any longer. And then what I'll do is come over here to Edit and Paste. And you can see that these two images, the gentleman here and also the two girls in the back, you can see that they are very similar in resolution. The size is very similar, And so that helps with the quality. If you have a very low resolution and then you have a high resolution image and you're trying to combine the two faces together, well, the quality is not going to be as good because you're trying to blow up a small image to fit a larger image, and you're going to see a huge decrease in quality there. So the first thing, what I'm going to do is double click on layer 1, and let's just give this a new name. I'll just call this man. The best way to match this face up with the one behind it here, which is the girl on the right, is turn down the opacity of this layer before you start transforming this layer. So go over to the opacity and just lower that down somewhere around 60 to 70%. Should work pretty good. That way you can see the image below it here. And by doing this, we can make sure that the eyes and the nose and the mouth somewhat line up in the closest positions as possible. I'm going to come over here to Edit and down here to Free Transform now that we've lowered the opacity, and then I'll hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and just come up here to the corner of this image, click and drag down, and I'll just pull this up. And what I'll probably do is just make this a little bit larger here so we can see those transformation handles a little bit easier. And then I'll rotate this image. Because we've lowered the transparency of that layer, or lowered the opacity, we can match up the eyes and the mouth. You see that? Because if we didn't lower that, then we would have to guess. We would have to move it out of the way and all that. So, but we've lowered the opacity, so now we can match this up as close as possible. And I'll just resize this down. There we go. So I'm just moving this around to get it to match this as close as possible. I'm going to go ahead and up here to View and zoom in at 1 level. And I'll just keep moving this around here to match this up. Now, I'll probably want to make sure that his face is overlapping, that it's going outside of her face in the back there. You can see if I zoom in really closely, and if I scroll down, you can see right here, this is the edge of his face, and right here is her face. So if we overlap that, then that will allow us to cover that up just a little bit more. But also keep in mind that her face in the back here is very close to her face over here. So go ahead and cancel that. But you can see that this is where the two heads almost touch. So we have to really watch that and match this up as close as possible. Also, her eyebrows are right there. And I could just move this down a little bit. And it looks like her chin's right about here. Her chin ends right about here, but his is like sticking way out. So I can make this a little bit smaller. There we go. And it's okay if he has a bigger chin there, being that, he is a man, so, I guess they just have bigger chins, so it's okay if that sticks out a little bit right there. And since we've cropped some of his neck here, then we can blend that in with her neck as well. And this is really a fun thing to do if you want to trick people or make something that looks kind of funny or whatever you want to do. That looks pretty good right there. I think I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And then I'll go ahead and click on this arrow at the top on the options bar to confirm that transformation. Or I can press the Enter key on the keyboard to confirm that as well. And then what we can do is increase the opacity after we've confirmed that. And we can see that face over right there. And you can see how it just matches up like that. So yeah, you guessed it. What we're going to do is erase some of the outer areas around his face here to make that blend in with the image behind it. So what we can do is create a layer mask on this layer so we don't directly edit the layer itself there. So let's just come down to the bottom of the layers palette right here and click on this Add Layer Mask button right here, and then select the paintbrush on the toolbar and make sure that the foreground color is set to black. And then we can right click on the image and adjust the size of the brush here with the master diameter. And to start, we can use just a hardness of 0, which will give us the softest masking effect possible. Let me lower that just a little bit more. But I can come in here and paint on this mask here. Let me go ahead and pull this out. And with the palette options, I'll just go ahead and increase the size of those thumbnails there. And I'll start to paint on this mask. And you can see what's happening here. And since I will probably use the ear of the girl, and behind there, I can just go ahead and erase that away. The bigger the brush you have, the more softer and the more gradual. Let's say if I hold my brush right here, if I click, it might erase away too much. But if I hold the brush a little bit outside of the area like this, you see what that line is right there? But if I hold it outside, click, and then move my mouse, you can see how it just slowly starts to fade away. And I'm barely touching this layer on this mask. I'm just going really outside here because I want these to blend in really nicely. Look at that. Then I'll go up on the top of the forehead and I'll do the same thing. I'll just take this big brush and I'll ride this along the very top. I won't come down here and start doing this. I'll just make sure I stay on that edge so it's very gradual. Look at that. I'll come over here. And this way we can get the wrinkles of his head in there like that. Okay, it's looking pretty cool. I'll go ahead and zoom in here. And I'll just take this brush once more and lower it down just a touch. And I'll start to paint on his neck here and make that gradual. Look at that. It's amazing how this exact same process has been repeated on this course so many times. And I think once you've mastered this whole masking process by making a layer mask and then painting on that mask, you can just with this little technique here, you can do so many things in Photoshop, and really that's what it's all about. You don't need to master every single little tool and filter in Photoshop to create great looking graphics. You just don't. You just have to understand a few little things. But I think a lot of people overlook very simple masking techniques like this. Also, just using a soft brush. A lot of people will mask with a lot harder brush. And it's a dead giveaway that they've done that. Like if I use this, it's just not very realistic because it's not a gradual blend. And you can see that his skin tones here are much different than the girl's skin tones in the back. Well, that's another big part of this tutorial is I'm going to show you how to match the skin tones because, you know, it has to match. If it doesn't, then it's just going to look kind of fake having his color skin there and then having her lighter brown skin in the back. But I'm going to zoom in here towards the bottom so I can see this a little bit closer. What I like to do is always zoom into my images when I'm working on them, get as close as possible. Now it looks like to me I masked a little bit too much into his chin here. So what I can do is press the D and X keys on the keyboard. It looks like in this case I can just press the D key, and what will happen is that will change the foreground to white. Then what I can do is paint on his chin here and bring back his chin just a little bit more. Look at that. I may even go just a little bit farther, all the way to the edge there, like this, and then I will press the X key on the keyboard, and that will make the foreground change to black. And so we'll paint with black on this layer mask. I'll go ahead and decrease the hardness there. And then I'll just ride right along this edge. If you could see this white stuff here, that was the background on our original image that we had of this gentleman here. So we're just getting rid of that white, which also it creates a glow around his face there. So we want to remove that. I'm going to right click and lower the hardness all the way down to 0 just to make sure this is nice and soft here. Look at that. Just putting a little bit extra effort here around his face. It's really going to make a big difference. A little more time we spend on this and to really get in there. And I want to change that foreground to white again. And then come in here. It looks like we got some yellow back there, which it looks like there's part of her shoulder there is coming through. Well, I think that'll pass if I zoom out, as long as it's not too conflicting. Looks a little soft around here, but I can come back to that later. Just want to make sure that I'm on that edge there. There we go, just so it's very gradual there. And I'll zoom in really close and go along up here. Sometimes having no hardness is just a little bit too much, almost too soft. So this is a very, very therapeutic type process here. Look at that. Just so I can see the edge. We want to see some edge there. We don't want it to blend too much. So if there's a little slight glow, that's okay. And I'll leave that for now. I can come back to that later if I want. Okay, so I'll come back and touch that up if I need to later on. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that edge. At least we could probably sharpen it up just a little bit more, but I'll come back to that. So let's take a look around here. And we have his forehead at the top here. That looks like it blends really nicely. We could probably go back and touch that up just a little bit with a soft brush. So I'll turn the hardness all the way down. And then I'll ride my brush just along his forehead here at the top. What I think I'll do now is show you how to match the skin tones together. And we can see obviously his skin right here has much more magenta than the woman or the girl in the back here. So I'm going to show you how to match the skin up right now. What we're going to do is convert this image to CMYK, and that will allow us to easily match these colors or these skin tones up. So let's go ahead and up here to Image, Mode, and I want you to just come down here to CMYK Color. And if it asks you to flatten, and it probably will, just click on Don't Flatten. There we go. Then let's just come over here to this layer, which is our man layer here. And let's hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and that is the Option key on the Mac. And then come down to this button right here, click on this. While you have that key held down, and I want you to select Curves. And then go ahead and put a check in this box right here. Click OK. And the Curves dialog comes up. This will help us in matching the skin tones. You can see right here where it says Channel. Well, this is a cool part about working with CMYK, and I like to work with CMYK anytime I'm doing any type of skin toning. It's because I have these magenta and cyan colors here. It makes it so much easier working with this rather than working with like an RGB type image mode. So what I'm going to do is we can look really closely at his skin here, and when there's any type of red, when you have more reds, well, there's a good chance that that means that there is a lot of magenta in that. You can see this is the magenta color here, which is sort of like a, like a pinkish color. And what we can do is always just focus on this, the middle of this diagonal line here. If you just click, you'll develop a point. And then what you can do is drag this down to the bottom right, towards the bottom right there. And if you look closely now at this image, you can see that we don't have so much of that red there anymore. Now if you see, if I go the other direction, look at that. Now that will just enhance the red. But we don't want that because that doesn't look very good at all. So let's just go this other direction here. And by decreasing some of that red, now you can see, if I decrease it all the way down, you can see now it's sort of giving us that greenish color. Well, what we're going to do is lower the magenta here, and you can come back to this and readjust it later. But let's come up here to magenta and select yellow, and we can also experiment with the yellows. Okay, so you see if we remove more yellow, then we're going to get more of that magenta type look, and that's going in the opposite direction of her skin tones that we see in the background there. So we may not have to adjust that too much. I want to come over here and select cyan. And if you have any types of blues, blue haze, or green type of look to skin, you can adjust those using the cyan setting here. And if you can see, if I increase that up to the upper left, you can see now we're getting more of like that blue type of turquoise type color. But if I go back to the lower right, you can see that it will decrease and remove that color. Look at that. And you can see this is what it was before, and this is after. So we can just come in here and switch back and forth. If we find that we need more yellow in that skin, then we can just increase the yellow. And then I can go back to the magenta. I can play with that a little bit, see how things look now. It looks like to me, as soon as if I lower that magenta too much, then it just looks like more green comes out. Well, what you can do is if you see too much green, then I'll just go back to cyan and decrease that. Look at that. And I'm just going to play with this yellow here because it looks like there's too much yellow. Now it's really starting to have a nice blend there with the face and her neck and everything. I mean, we can still see our masking job. If you look closely, you can still see along here that we've masked that, and it doesn't look very realistic. But we're going to go back and fix that up a little bit later. Look at that. And what I'll do is just go ahead and click OK, because since we've made this an image adjustment, well, we can come back to it anytime by double-clicking on the channel's image adjustment right here, and then that'll just bring it up once more. And come back here and make a fine adjustment. Click OK. There you go. So what I'm going to do here is zoom into this side of his face right here, and let's go ahead and touch this part up right here so we don't have this like line, almost looks like a line going up here. And I'll click on this layer mask on this man layer here, and I'll select the paintbrush with a very soft brush and maybe even a larger brush. I'll just come right here, start to click on this edge. I want to try to retain as much of his wrinkles as possible. But you can see that his shadows there are much darker than her skin because it's just so light. So in this case, what we could do is go up here to Image Adjustments, Shadow Highlight, and I can play around with this a little bit. Now, of course, we don't want this applied to his entire face, but if you look very closely at the edge, you can see how much more that blends in. Look, this is before, and this is after. So what we can do is go into Quick Mask and just mask that side of his face. So let's go over here and click on this button right here. If you're not using Photoshop CS3, you're going to see two buttons on the bottom of the toolbar. So you'll want to click on the one on the right, and that will go into Quick Mask mode. And you should see it. It should look like a little red icon. And then you can select the paintbrush with the foreground as black. And what we can do is paint this red mask along the edge of his face right here, because we want to enhance that shadow. And then I'll go back to standard mode. So what you want to do is click on, if you're not using Photoshop CS3, click on the left button down on the bottom of the toolbar, and that will go back to standard mode. In CS3, we only have one button, which is kind of cool. So all you have to do is re-click that one button, and now you should see a selection around that. And I'll come up here to select inverse, and you can see that we've softly selected this side of his face here. So what we can do now is come over here to Image Adjustments and down here to Shadow Highlight. And if you don't want that selection there while you are adjusting the image with an image adjustment, you can turn that off by coming up here to View, and see right here where it says Extras. Just select that, and that will make that selection go away. Now it's still there, it's just you can't see it. But you can see this is what it was before. And now that we've masked that edge there, this will enable us to enhance that edge just a little bit more, making it blend in with the woman's skin tone in the back. Look at that. Cool, this is before and this is after. I'm looking at the bottom here to see how that turned out. And so you can use these techniques on almost any image that you have, any type of image where you're swapping out faces or whatever. And so you can see it works fairly well. I'll click on this layer mask here and select my brush tool, and I can just come in here and you know, touch up anything if I need to. It's a very touchy area there. I could probably spend a little bit more time and get that to be more perfect if I really wanted to. I really want to show you just the difference there. I notice his skin has a lot more texture to it. So we could add some noise on her skin back here to make that blend in a little better. Let's come down to his neck here. And we want to have some type of shadow down here. But I'm not particularly liking this shadow that we have here. I'll select the brush tool and click on this layer mask and see if there is another way. Okay, we still have that selection on that I totally forgot about that. But if you go up here to extras, you can see that that selection up here is still on and it's not allowing us to touch up down here. So don't forget to turn that off. Select, deselect, and then now it'll allow me to go in here like this and add in that shadow. So I'm actually glad I made that mistake, because then hopefully, you know, you'll remember to turn that off, because it's very easy to forget. Okay, there we go. So we have some type of shadow for his big chin here that's sticking out, and that looks pretty good. I can even see that we could probably touch up the skin tone just a touch. Sometimes you get so close it's hard to really see what it needs. If it needs less magenta, if it needs more cyan. There's another way to do this too, and I wasn't planning on showing you this, but if you really want to know another technique on how to get skin and tones to match as close as possible, what you can do is come up here to Window, select Info, and focus right here where it says CMYK on the Info palette. And watch this. I'll select the eyedropper tool, and then I'll hover the eyedropper over his skin. And look really closely up on the info bar. You'll notice that you see how where it says Y, that just means yellow. And you can see how that's the highest percentage with a 57%. That means that his skin here has more yellow than any other color. It has more yellow than it does cyan and magenta. And so if I hover over her skin, we can see that her skin has a lot more yellow. So in that case, maybe that means that we need to add more yellow to this skin here to make it match properly. So that's another way you can match skin tones. You just have to make sure that you get the right shading, because if you don't, then it's going to throw it off a little bit. I'm focusing on his cheek here and on her face just before her ear here. I'm trying to make these two spots match the best I can. And you can also hover over these areas while you have the curves dialog open, just to extra check things. And it'll show you before and after up there. It's pretty cool. I mean, Photoshop rocks for this type of stuff. I'm seeing like a green in his face there. But see, if I do that, then it starts to remove a little bit more than I want. But see, I'm making this a much bigger deal than it really is. I mean, I don't know how crazy you want to go with this. But most of what I see is that the shadows and little wrinkles in his face, matching those up is going to be the biggest challenge of this. But I also want to note that since we've applied the skin tone to his entire face, well, we've also affected his eyes. Okay? So since we've made this an adjustment layer, it creates this mask over here. You see this? So we can just remove the curves adjustment in specific areas on the image. But since this mask is white, then we'll need to paint black on this mask to remove those areas. So select the paintbrush and press the D and X key on the keyboard until you get the foreground color to black. And lower the brush size a little bit there so you can get in here with his eyes and paint on his eyes to bring back the original color of his eyes, which are blue, they're not green. There you go. And you can also, if you want to go really crazy with this, you can do the lips as well. Because since we've changed that skin tone, it's going to change the color of the lips too. Personally though, I kind of like the other toning, but if you want to make it perfect, you can bring back his original mouth color here. But the thing is that I think it was probably more like a camera setting as well. You can see now we've got so much yellow in his face here, which is starting to become distracting a little bit. So I'm just going to remove that now. And there you go. I could probably work on it a little bit more, but that's most of the technique there. Make that blend in a little bit more. There we go. Make his cheek go up into her face just a little bit. Then I'll probably go on the side of his face right here and touch this up just a little bit. And we're almost done here. And there you go. And that's how we can swap faces in Photoshop. This is, I'll show you the before here. And this is the after. So have fun with that. Impress your family and friends. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and learned a lot with the little techniques that we went over. I could have went a little bit more in depth here with some of the matching and stuff like that, but I think you pretty much get the gist of things, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys on the next video. See you later.